Dinder Part 1, The Fateful Auction. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Cedar Ridge, a frontier town that had seen better days. The air hung thick with the smell of horse sweat, leather, and the acrid smoke from the blacksmith's forge. It was auction day, and the town square buzzed with more activity than it had seen in months. Eli Bear Callahan stood at the edge of the crowd, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the packed dirt. At 6 feet 9 inches, he towered over most men, his shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway. His weathered face, tanned by years under the western sun, bore the lines of a man who'd known both hard work and harder times. The Stetson perched on his head had seen better days, much like the ranch he was desperately trying to save. He hadn't wanted to come. The whole business made his stomach turn, the buying and selling of human beings like they were cattle. But desperation had a way of making a man do things he'd never thought he would. The Callahan ranch was bleeding money, and without help, he'd lose everything his father had built. "Step right up, gentlemen." The auctioneer's voice rang out across the square. Samuel Hutchins was a weasel of a man, thin and sharp-featured, with eyes that never quite met yours straight on. "Fine workers here today, strong backs for your fields, skilled hands for your households." The platform had been hastily constructed of rough pine planks, and it creaked under the weight of those forced to stand upon it. Eli's jaw tightened as he watched men and women led up one by one, their dignity stripped away with each shouted bid. That's when he saw her. Clara Mayfield stood with her back straight and her chin lifted, despite the chains that bound her wrists. She was perhaps 27 years old, with skin the color of polished mahogany and eyes that held a quiet intelligence that seemed out of place in such surroundings, unlike the others who kept their gazes downcast. She looked out at the crowd with an expression of calm assessment, as if she were studying them rather than the other way around. "Next up, we have a prime specimen," Hutchins announced, gesturing toward Clara with his gavel. "Young, healthy, previously employed in domestic service back east, can cook, clean, and tend to household duties. Shall we start the bidding at $50? Something peculiar happened then. As Hutchins fumbled with his papers, a sheet slipped from his grasp and fluttered toward the edge of the platform. Without thinking, Clara stepped forward and caught it, her movements graceful despite the shackles. But instead of simply handing it back, her eyes scanned the document quickly, and a small, knowing smile played at the corners of her mouth. She could read. Eli found himself leaning forward, intrigued. In his experience, few enslaved people had been taught their letters, and those who had often tried to hide it. But this woman had read that paper as naturally as breathing. And what's more, she seemed to understand what she'd seen. $50, someone called out. 60, came another voice. Eli recognized some of the bidders. Harold Mason, who ran the general store and was known for working his help into the ground, Albert Brennan, whose temper was as legendary as his drinking, and a few others whose reputations weren't much better. $75, Mason shouted, already looking pleased with himself. Without quite knowing why, Eli found himself stepping forward. $100. A hush fell over the crowd. Heads turned to stare at the giant who just made such an outrageous bid. Even Clara looked surprised, her intelligent eyes focusing on him with sharp curiosity. $100? Hutchins repeated, barely concealing his glee. "Do I hear 110? Mason sputtered. That's ridiculous for a woman. What are you thinking, Callahan?" Eli ignored him, keeping his eyes on the auctioneer. $100, he repeated firmly. "Going once, going twice. Sold to Mr. Eli Callahan." As the crowd dispersed, muttering and shaking their heads, Eli made his way to the side of the platform where transactions were completed. His hands shook slightly as he counted out the bills. It was nearly all the money he had left, saved for what he'd hoped would be seed and supplies. But something about the woman's bearing, that flash of intelligence he'd witnessed, told him this was right. "You've made an expensive choice, Mr. Callahan," Hutchins said as he pocketed his commission. "Hope she's worth it." Clara was brought down from the platform, and for the first time, Eli got a close look at her. Despite her circumstances, she was clean and well kept, her simple calico dress worn but carefully mended. Her hands, he noticed, bore calluses that spoke of hard work, but her fingers were long and delicate. When their eyes met, he saw neither fear nor servility, but rather a careful evaluation. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat slightly. The gesture seemed to surprise her. "Sir," she responded, her voice low and measured, with a slight accent he couldn't quite place. "My wagon's just over there," he said, gesturing to the weathered buckboard hitched to 2 patient mules. "It's a fair ride to the ranch." As they walked, Eli noticed the way she moved, not with the shuffle of defeat he'd seen in so many others, but with a quiet grace that spoke of inner strength. When they reached the wagon, he hesitated, then offered his hand to help her up. She looked at it for a moment, as if puzzled by the courtesy, before accepting. "Might I ask," she said once they were underway, the town falling behind them, "why you paid such a sum? The others would have sold for half that price." Eli kept his eyes on the road ahead, considering his answer. "Saw you read that paper," he said finally. "Figure a woman who can read might be able to help with more than just cooking and cleaning. And if I told you that you were mistaken, that I cannot read." He glanced at her then, catching that same small smile from before. "Then I'd say you were being careful, which would make you smart in a different way." She said nothing to that, but he thought he saw approval in her expression. The road to the Callahan Ranch wound through stands of cottonwood and mesquite, past dried creek beds that hadn't seen water since spring. The landscape was harsh but beautiful in its way, painted in shades of brown and gold under the vast blue sky. Clara took it all in silently, her keen eyes missing nothing. "It's not much," Eli said as they crested a hill and the ranch came into view. "Been a hard year." The understatement was almost laughable. The main house, once his mother's pride, needed paint desperately. The barn door hung at an angle, and several sections of fence had clearly been patched with whatever materials were at hand. The few cattle visible in the nearest pasture looked thin, ribs showing through their hides. "Every place has its seasons," Clara said quietly, "both good and bad." They pulled up in front of the house just as the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. An elderly man emerged from the barn, squinting at them with suspicion. This was Jed Porter, who'd worked the ranch since Eli's father's time and who trusted newcomers about as much as he trusted rattlesnakes. "Who's this then?" Jed demanded, his grizzled face set in disapproving lines. "This is Clara," Eli said simply. "She'll be helping out around here." "Helping out?" Jed snorted. "We can barely feed ourselves, and you bring another mouth?" "That's enough, Jed," Eli said, his tone brooking no argument. He turned to Clara. "Let me show you where you'll be staying." He led her to a small room off the kitchen, clean but sparse, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window that looked out toward the hills. It had been his sister's room, before she'd married and moved to California. "This will do nicely," Clara said, setting down the small bundle of possessions she'd been allowed to bring. "Supper's usually around sunset," Eli told her. "Nothing fancy. Jed and I have been making do with pretty simple fare." "I understand," she said. Then, surprisingly, "Mr. Callahan, that paper I read at the auction, it was a manifest." You weren't the only one listed as a buyer today. He frowned. What do you mean? There was another name, Silas Rourke, listed for a different sort of transaction. The seller's commission was unusually high. Eli felt a chill despite the warm evening. Rourke owned the neighboring spread and had been making offers on Callahan land for months. You're sure? I read quickly but accurately. She said simply, I thought you should know. As Eli left her to settle in, his mind churned with questions. What kind of transaction would involve such a high commission? And why did he have the feeling that bringing Clara to his ranch had set something larger in motion? From the kitchen window, he watched the last rays of sun paint the hills gold and crimson. Whatever tomorrow brought, he knew that life at the Callahan ranch had just become much more complicated. He only hoped it would be complicated in the right ways. The sound of hoofbeats made him look up. A rider was approaching fast from the direction of town. As the figure grew closer, Eli recognized the elegant form of Margaret Doyle, his intended riding side saddle on her prize Arabian mare. Her expression, even from a distance, promised storms ahead. Yes, he thought grimly. Complicated indeed. Part 2. The crumbling ranch and watchful eyes. The morning after Clara's arrival dawned clear and merciless, the sun already baking the earth by the time she emerged from her small room. She had risen before first light, as had been her habit for years, and spent the quiet pre-dawn hours taking stock of her new surroundings. The kitchen was adequate but neglected, the pantry nearly bare, and dust had settled into corners that hadn't seen attention in months. Through the window, she watched Eli Callahan stride from the house to the barn, his massive frame moving with surprising grace for such a large man. In the early light, she could see the weight he carried on those broad shoulders, not just physical labor, but the burden of a failing legacy. You're up early. Clara turned to find Jed Porter standing in the doorway, his weathered face set in its customary scowl. The old ranch hand looked her up and down with undisguised suspicion. I've always been an early riser, Mr. Porter, she replied evenly. I thought I might prepare breakfast if you'd show me where things are kept. Jed moved past her to the stove, his movements stiff with age and hard living. Coffee's in that tin. Bacon's in the smokehouse, what little there is. Hens might have laid a few eggs, if the coyotes haven't gotten to them first. As Clara set about preparing the meal, she observed the old man from the corner of her eye. His hostility didn't surprise her. She'd encountered it many times before. But there was something else there, too. A protective fierceness when he spoke of the ranch that told her his loyalty to the Callahan family ran deep. How long have you worked here, Mr. Porter? She asked, cracking eggs into a cast-iron skillet. Longer than you've been alive, I reckon, he replied curtly. Came out here with Eli's father back in '52. Helped build this place from nothing but sagebrush and dreams. It must be hard, seeing it struggle. Jed's eyes sharpened. What would you know about it? Clara didn't answer directly, instead focusing on the bacon sizzling in the pan. After a moment, she said, I know the look of a place that was once loved. The kitchen garden out back. Someone spent years tending those herbs, the rose bushes by the porch, though they're wild now. The way the boards in the hallway are worn smooth in particular places, from the same feet walking the same paths day after day. Jed was quiet for a long moment. Then grudgingly, that was Mrs. Callahan's doing, Eli's mother. Finest woman ever to grace this territory. Ranch hasn't been the same since she passed. The door banged open, and Eli ducked through, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg. Morning, Jed, Miss Clara. Breakfast is ready, Clara announced, setting plates on the scarred wooden table. Eli's eyebrows rose at the sight of the meal, simple but well prepared. a far cry from the burned bacon and bitter coffee he and Jed had been subsisting on. "This is... Thank you." They ate in relative silence, broken only by the clink of forks on plates and Jed's occasional grunt of grudging approval. Clara noticed how Eli kept glancing at a stack of papers near his elbow, his brow furrowing deeper with each look. "Troubles?" she asked quietly. Eli's jaw tightened. "Feed bill came in yesterday, twice what it should be. Says here we ordered double our usual amount." "Or did you?" "Of course not. We can barely afford what we normally get." He pushed the paper away in disgust. "Must be some mistake at Henderson's mill." Clara's eyes flicked to the document. "May I?" Eli hesitated, then slid the paper toward her. She studied it carefully, running her finger down the columns of numbers. "The arithmetic is correct," she said slowly. "But look here, the signature authorizing the increase. Is that your hand?" Eli leaned closer, and Clara caught a whiff of leather and honest sweat. No. That's not how I sign my name. The C is all wrong." "Someone's been placing orders in your name," Jed growled. "I'll bet my last dollar it's that snake Rourke." "We can't prove that," Eli said wearily. "And even if we could, I still have to pay the bill or lose credit at the mill entirely." A sharp rap at the door interrupted them. Through the window, Clara glimpsed a fine carriage, out of place against the ranch's rustic backdrop. A moment later, Margaret Doyle swept into the kitchen without waiting for an invitation. She was everything Clara was not. Pale-skinned, golden-haired, dressed in silk and lace despite the frontier setting. Her blue eyes were cold as winter sky as they took in the scene. Eli at breakfast with his workers, one of whom was a woman of color. "Eli," Margaret said, her voice honey-sweet but with an edge sharp enough to cut. "I heard you made quite a spectacle of yourself at the auction yesterday." "Margaret," Eli rose, his expression guarded. "I didn't expect you this morning." "Clearly." Her gaze settled on Clara with the weight of judgment. "And this is your purchase?" Clara felt the word like a slap, but kept her expression neutral. She rose smoothly, inclining her head slightly. "Clara Mayfield, ma'am." Margaret's lips pursed as if she'd tasted something sour. "I see. Well, Eli, I hope she proves worth the extraordinary sum you paid. The whole town is talking about it." "Let them talk," Eli said quietly. "Let them talk?" Margaret's voice rose. "Eli, you spent nearly every penny you had on a single worker when your ranch is falling apart. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking I needed help," Eli replied, his tone steady but firm. "And I got it." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Help? Is that what we're calling it?" She turned her attention back to Clara. "Tell me, girl, what exactly are your qualifications? Can you even write your own name?" Clara met her gaze steadily. "I can write a great deal more than my name, ma'am. I can also calculate figures, maintain household accounts, and identify anomalies in financial documents. Among other things." The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret's face flushed red, then white. "Anomalies? You dare to—" "Miss Doyle," Clara interrupted gently. "I meant no offense. I simply answered your question." "How dare you speak to me as an equal?" Margaret whirled on Eli. "You see? This is what comes of your foolishness. She doesn't know her place." "It seems to me she knows it just fine," Jed muttered into his coffee. Margaret ignored him. "Eli, I insist you return her immediately. Get your money back and hire proper help. Someone who understands the natural order of things." "The natural order?" Eli's voice had gone dangerously quiet. "And what order is that, Margaret?" "You know perfectly well what I mean." She smoothed her skirts with agitated hands. My father is already concerned about your judgment. This will only confirm his doubts about our arrangement. Then perhaps he should discuss those doubts with me directly, instead of sending you as his messenger." Margaret's face contorted with fury. "How dare you? I came here out of concern for you, for us, for our future." "Did you?" Eli moved to the stack of bills on the table. "Tell me, Margaret, has your father mentioned anything about grain prices lately? Or about anyone trying to corner the feed market?" "What? No, of course not. Why would he—" She stopped, seeming to realize she'd said too much. "I have no idea what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything, just asking questions." Margaret's gaze darted between Eli and Clara, suspicion dawning in her eyes. "She's put ideas in your head already, hasn't she? This is exactly what I warned you about. These people are cunning. Eli, they'll say anything to—" "That's enough." Eli's voice cut through her tirade like a blade. "Clara is a member of this household now, and you'll speak of her with respect or not at all." The two stared at each other for a long moment, the air crackling with tension. Finally, Margaret gathered her skirts and headed for the door. "We'll see what my father has to say about this. And Eli? You might want to consider carefully where your loyalties lie. The Doyle family has been very patient with your difficulties. That patience is not infinite." She swept out, leaving silence in her wake. Through the window, they watched her carriage depart in a cloud of dust. "Well," Jed said finally, "that went about as well as a rattlesnake in a bedroll." Eli sank back into his chair, suddenly looking older than his years. "She's right about one thing. Her father holds the note on half this ranch. If he calls it in—" "He wouldn't dare," Jed protested, "not with you engaged to his daughter." "Engaged for now," Eli said grimly. "You heard her. That arrangement is hanging by a thread." Clara quietly began clearing the breakfast dishes, her mind working through what she'd observed. The forged signature. Margaret's reaction to questions about grain prices, the threat about the loan, pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together yet. "Mr. Callahan," she said carefully, "might I look at your other bills and correspondence? If someone is forging your signature on feed orders, they might be tampering with other documents as well." Eli studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Everything's in the study, such as it is." The study turned out to be a small room off the main parlor, dusty and cluttered with the detritus of ranch business. Clara spent the rest of the morning there, methodically sorting through papers while dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight streaming through the window. What she found made her stomach sink. Bills inflated beyond reason, orders placed without authorization, correspondence that didn't match Eli's straightforward way of speaking, and threaded through it all, mentions of Silas Rourke, offering to buy cattle at below-market prices, suggesting partnerships that would essentially give him control of Callahan water rights, always presenting himself as a helpful neighbor while the ranch's troubles mysteriously multiplied. "Find anything interesting?" Clara looked up to find Eli in the doorway, his large frame blocking most of the light. "Several things," she replied carefully, "but nothing that constitutes proof. Whoever is doing this is clever. Story of my life lately." He entered the room, having to duck slightly under the doorframe. "Troubles everywhere I look, but nothing solid enough to fight." "It's sometimes the best defense is careful observation," Clara suggested. "Patterns often reveal themselves if you watch long enough." Eli picked up one of the sorted papers, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle with the delicate pages. "You talk like someone with education. How does a—" He stopped, clearly uncomfortable. "How does a slave learn to read and think?" Clara finished for him. "That's a long story, Mr. Callahan. Perhaps someday I'll tell it. I'd like that, he said simply, and Clara was surprised to realize he meant it. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they could see Jed arguing with someone near the barn. Eli muttered something under his breath and strode outside, Clara following at a discreet distance. The visitor was a thin, nervous-looking man in a cheap suit, Clarence Wiggins from the bank. His presence here meant nothing good. "Mr. Callahan," Wiggins stammered, clearly intimidated by Eli's towering presence. "I'm sorry to intrude, but Mr. Doyle insisted I deliver this personally." He handed over an envelope with shaking hands. Eli read its contents, his face growing stonier with each line. 30 days. His voice was dangerously quiet. "He's giving me 30 days to pay half the loan or he'll foreclose." "I'm afraid so, sir. Unless—" Wiggins glanced nervously at Clara. "Unless certain arrangements can be made. Mr. Doyle indicated he might be willing to extend the deadline if you were to reconsider some recent decisions." The meaning was clear as day. Get rid of Clara, fall back in line, and the banker might show mercy. "Tell Mr. Doyle," Eli said slowly, each word precisely enunciated, "that I'll pay my debts my own way," after Wiggins scurried off. Eli stood staring at the horizon, his hands clenched into fists. The weight of the world seemed to press down on those broad shoulders. "There might be ways to raise the money," Clara said quietly. "If we could prove the fraudulent charges, reduce the inflated bills." "With what evidence?" Eli turned to her, frustration clear in every line of his body. "You said yourself we don't have proof." "Not yet," Clara agreed. "But I've noticed something interesting about these incidents. The mistaken orders, the strayed cattle. They follow a pattern. They always happen when certain combinations of your workers have night duty." Eli frowned. "You think one of my own men took—" "I think," Clara said carefully, "that someone is being paid to ensure your difficulties continue. And I think I know how to find out who." As the sun climbed toward its zenith, casting short shadows across the drought-stricken land, Clara outlined her observations, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she saw something kindle in Eli Callahan's eyes that had been absent before. Hope. Part 3. The swirl of silent sabotage. The pattern Clara had noticed became clearer over the following weeks. Like clockwork, every time Tom Harker and Wade Simmons shared night watch duty, something went wrong by morning. Fences mysteriously failed. Water troughs developed leaks. And twice more, small groups of cattle wandered through conveniently opened gates onto Silas Rourke's property. Clara kept her observations in a small notebook she'd found in the study, recording dates, times, and circumstances with meticulous care. She worked by candlelight after the household retired, her neat handwriting filling page after page with damning patterns. It was a Tuesday evening when things escalated. Clara was in the kitchen, preparing a simple stew from the meager supplies, when she heard the thunder of hooves approaching fast. Through the window, she saw Eli racing back from the far pasture, his face grim. "Lost another dozen head," he announced as he burst through the door, dust still clinging to his clothes. "Found them on Rourke's land again. He's demanding compensation for damage to his property." Jed, who'd been mending harness at the table, spat in disgust. "Damage? Those cattle barely had time to crop grass before we rounded them up. Doesn't matter, he's got witnesses saying they trampled his creek bank, muddied his water." Eli slumped into a chair, exhaustion written in every line of his body. "Another bill I can't pay." Clara set a bowl of stew before him. "Who were the witnesses?" "Ranch hands of his. Convenient, isn't it?" Eli ate mechanically, barely tasting the food. "And before you ask, yes, Tom and Wade had the night watch again. "Mr. Callahan," Clara said carefully. "I believe it's time we discussed what I've observed." She fetched her notebook and laid it open before him. As Eli read, his expression darkened like a thundercloud building on the horizon. "You're certain about this?" "The pattern is consistent. Every incident corresponds with their watch duties. Moreover," she turned to another page. "I've been tracking the feed deliveries. The inflated orders always arrive the day after Tom picks up the mail from town. He's intercepting our correspondence," Jed growled. "Adding to the orders before they reach the mill." "That would be my conclusion," Clara agreed, "though proving it is another matter." Eli's fist came down on the table, making the dishes jump. "Tom Harker. I gave that man a job when no one else would hire him. And this is how he repays me?" "Money can make a man do terrible things," Clara said quietly. "Especially if he's being paid well enough. O'Rourke," the name came out like a curse. "Has to be. He's been after this ranch for years." A knock at the door interrupted them. Clara answered it to find a young boy, perhaps 12 years old, hat in hand. "A message for Mr. Callahan," the boy said, handing over an envelope. "Mr. Rourke said to wait for an answer." Eli read the message, his face growing stonier with each word. Without speaking, he passed it to Clara. "My dear neighbor," she read aloud. "I find myself in the fortunate position to offer assistance in your time of need. I am prepared to purchase your entire cattle operation at a fair price, which would allow you to settle your debts and retain your house and immediate grounds. This offer stands for 3 days only. Your friend, Silas Rourke." "Fair price," Jed snorted. "I'll bet it's half what the cattle are worth." "Less," Eli said grimly, "but enough to pay off Doyle and keep a roof over our heads. Barely." The boy shifted nervously. "Mr. Rourke said to tell you he's being generous, considering the state of your stock." "The state of my stock is fine," Eli snapped, then caught himself. It wasn't the boy's fault. "Tell Mr. Rourke I'll consider his offer." After the boy left, silence settled over the kitchen like a shroud. Clara could see the weight of the decision pressing down on Eli. Accept Rourke's offer and lose almost everything his father built, or refuse and risk losing it all. "There might be another way," she said slowly. Both men turned to her. "Speak your mind," Eli encouraged. "Tom Harker is greedy. That much is clear. What if we gave him an opportunity too tempting to resist, something that would prove his guilt beyond doubt?" "What kind of opportunity?" Clara outlined her plan. It was risky, requiring careful timing and a bit of theater. But it might work. As she spoke, she saw the despair in Eli's eyes gradually replaced by determination. "It's worth a try," he decided. "What have we got to lose?" "Everything," Clara thought but didn't say. The next morning, Eli made a show of examining his prize bull, Goliath, in the presence of several ranch hands, including Tom Harker. The massive animal was one of the few valuable assets left on the ranch. "Thinking of selling him," Eli said loudly, patting the bull's flank. "Heard there's a buyer coming through from Kansas City, willing to pay top dollar for good breeding stock." Tom's eyes lit up with interest. "That so, boss? When's this buyer coming?" "Friday night, supposedly. Wants to do business quiet-like, away from prying eyes." Eli shrugged. "Plans to meet at the old line shack near Willow Creek. Cash deal." Clara, watching from the porch, saw Tom exchange a meaningful glance with Wade Simmons. The bait was set. Over the next 2 days, they maintained the pretense. Eli spoke often of the mysterious buyer, even showing a telegram, carefully forged by Clara, confirming the meeting. Tom volunteered for Friday night watch duty, which surprised no one. Friday arrived with a tension that made the air feel electric. As dusk fell, Eli and Jed prepared to ride out, both armed. "I still don't like you staying here alone," Eli told Clara. "If something goes wrong, I'll be fine," she assured him. "I'll bar the door and keep the shotgun handy." What she didn't tell him was that she had her own part to play in tonight's drama. An hour after the men left, Clara heard horses approaching, peering through the curtains. She saw Tom Harker and Wade Simmons, along with two riders she recognized as Rourke's men. They were heading toward the barn where Goliath was kept. Moving quickly, Clara slipped out the back door and made her way to the bell tower, a tall structure used to call hands in from the range. She'd prepared everything earlier: a bull's lead rope, a blank bill of sale, and most importantly, a small bottle of ink mixed with silver nitrate, a chemical that would mark anyone who touched it. She watched as the men led Goliath from his pen. Tom was holding papers, no doubt forged documents to show a legitimate sale if anyone asked questions. In the moonlight, she could see him dip a pen in ink and sign with a flourish. That was her cue. Clara rang the bell with all her might, the bronze voice booming across the range. The rustlers froze, then scrambled for their horses as answering shouts came from the direction of Willow Creek. But in their haste, Tom dropped the papers and the ink bottle, which shattered on the ground. By the time Eli, Jed, and the sheriff arrived, for Clara's plan had included alerting the law, Tom's hands were stained with the telltale ink, as were the scattered papers clearly showing forged bills of sale. "Tom Harker," Sheriff McKenna said grimly, "you're under arrest for theft and forgery." "It wasn't my idea," Tom blurted, panic in his voice. "Rourke paid me to cause problems, make Callahan desperate enough to sell." "That's a serious accusation," the sheriff noted, though he didn't look surprised. "You willing to swear to that in court?" Tom nodded frantically, words pouring out of him like water from a broken dam. The opened gates, the doctored feed orders, the false damage claims, all of it orchestrated by Silas Rourke to force Eli into bankruptcy. As the sheriff led the prisoners away, Eli turned to Clara, wonder in his eyes. "The ink, how did you know?" "Silver nitrate," she explained. "It reacts with skin, leaving a stain that lasts for days. A doctor I once worked for used it to mark medicine bottles." She paused. "Among other things." "Other things," Eli repeated, studying her with new appreciation. "That's quite a story you're not telling." "Perhaps someday," Clara said, echoing her words from weeks before. They returned to the house to find unexpected visitors. Silas Rourke himself, accompanied by Margaret Doyle and her father. Rourke's face was purple with rage. "You set me up," he accused, pointing a shaking finger at Eli. "I protected what's mine," Eli replied calmly. Tom sang like a bird. "Rourke, the sheriff has everything he needs. You can't prove anything. It's the word of a common thief against mine. And the word of your own men, who were caught red-handed," Clara added quietly. "Not to mention the paper trail Tom so helpfully preserved." Rourke whirled on her. This is your doing, isn't it?" Filling his head with suspicions, turning him against his neighbors. "His neighbors," Clara said evenly, "shouldn't have been stealing from him." How dare you speak to Mr. Rourke that way?" Margaret shrieked. "Know your place." "I know my place quite well," Clara replied. "I stand with those who act with honor, against those who don't." Banker Doyle had been silent throughout this exchange, his calculating eyes taking in everything. Now he spoke, his voice cold. "Eli, this changes nothing regarding your loan. You still owe payment in 2 weeks. Actually," Sheriff McKenna interrupted, having returned from securing his prisoners, "that might not be true. If Rourke's been inflating costs and stealing cattle, Mr. Callahan might be owed considerable damages. Could be enough to cover that loan and then some. Doyle's face went pale. You can't be serious. I dead serious, course. If you were to extend that loan deadline, show some good faith while the court sorts this out. The sheriff let the suggestion hang. Rourke made a strangled sound and stormed out, followed quickly by the Doyles. Margaret paused at the door, shooting Clara a look of pure venom before disappearing into the night. When they were alone, Eli sank into a chair, the events of the evening finally catching up with him. We did it, he said, disbelief coloring his voice. We actually did it. You did it, Clara corrected. I merely observed and suggested. Don't. Eli's voice was firm. Don't diminish what you've done when you saved this ranch. The ranch isn't saved yet, Clara reminded him. Rourke will hire expensive lawyers. The bank still wants its money, and you've made enemies tonight. Then we'll face them together, Jed said, surprising them both. The old man looked almost embarrassed by his declaration. That is, if you're planning to stay on. Clara looked between the two men, Eli with his honest strength and surprising gentleness, Jed with his gruff loyalty and hidden depths. For the first time in years, she felt something she'd thought lost forever. She felt like she belonged. I believe I will stay, she said softly. If you'll have me. Have you? Eli's laugh was shaky with relief. Clara Mayfield, I'd be a fool to let you go. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, promising rain for the drought-stricken land. But inside the ranch house, for the first time in months, hope flickered like a candle flame, small but steady against the darkness. The battle for Callahan Ranch was far from over. But now, they would face it together, an unlikely alliance forged by necessity, strengthened by respect, and tempered by the harsh realities of frontier justice. As Clara retired to her room that night, she pulled out a hidden photograph, the only memento from her past life. It showed a dignified, elderly man, dark-skinned like herself, wearing the clothes of a Freeman and holding a medical bag. You were right, Dr. Freeman, she whispered to the image. Knowledge is power, and power, properly used, can change everything. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, for the first time since she'd stood on that auction block, Clara Mayfield allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a different future, a free future. Part 4. The crisis that struck everything down. The morning started like any other, with Clara rising before dawn to prepare breakfast and Eli checking on the cattle. But by the time the sun had climbed halfway to its zenith, everything had changed. Jed was the first to notice. Boss, he shouted from the north pasture, something's wrong with the stock. Eli and Clara rushed to where the old ranch hand stood among the cattle. The sight that greeted them made Eli's blood run cold. Several cows were down, their breathing labored, white foam collecting at the corners of their mouths. Others stood with their heads hanging low, legs trembling. Hey, dear God, Eli breathed, dropping to his knees beside a struggling heifer. What's happening to them? More cattle were showing symptoms by the minute. Some staggered and fell, their bodies convulsing. The healthy animals milled about in distress, lowing mournfully. He could be Texas fever, Jed suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. Though I ain't never seen it come on this fast. It's not Texas fever, Clara said quietly, kneeling beside a fallen steer. She gently examined the animal, noting the excessive salivation, the difficulty breathing, the peculiar sweet smell on its breath. The symptoms are wrong. Then what? Eli's voice was desperate. Clara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she moved among the affected cattle, observing, touching, smelling. Her mind raced through possibilities, drawing on knowledge she'd gained years ago in a different life. By noon, The situation had worsened dramatically. Nearly half the herd was affected, and the first deaths had begun. Eli sent Jed racing to town for Dr. Holcomb, the local veterinarian, while he and Clara did what they could to comfort the suffering animals. Dr. Holcomb arrived 2 hours later, his medical bag in hand and skepticism written across his weathered face. He was a competent man but set in his ways, with little patience for anything outside his experience. "Looks like bloat to me," he announced after a cursory examination. "Probably got into some bad feed. Best to isolate the sick ones and let nature take its course." "It's not bloat," Clara said firmly. "Look at the way they're breathing. Short, rapid gasps, and the trembling in their extremities. This is poisoning." Holcomb's face reddened. "And what would you know about it, girl?" "I know what I see," Clara replied evenly. "And I know these symptoms match alkaloid poisoning." "Alkaloid?" Eli looked between them. "What's that mean?" "Plant poisons," Holcomb scoffed. "Nonsense. There's nothing in these pastures but good grass." "The symptoms," Clara began, but Holcomb cut her off. "I've been doctoring animals since before you were born," he snapped. "Don't presume to tell me my business." He turned to Eli. "Isolate the sick ones. If it's contagious, you'll want to protect what's left of your herd. Might be best to put the worst ones down. Prevent the spread." "Put them down," Eli's voice was hollow. "That's near half my herd." "Better than losing them all," Holcomb said bluntly. "I'm sorry, Callahan, but that's my recommendation. Unless you want to risk total loss." After the veterinarian left, Eli stood among his dying cattle like a man in a nightmare. Everything, his father's legacy, his own dreams, any hope of saving the ranch, was crumbling before his eyes. "We should do as he says," Jed said heavily. "Put them out of their misery." "No," Clara's voice was quiet but firm. "Not yet." "Clara, I appreciate what you're trying to do," Eli said wearily. "But Holcomb's the expert." "Dr. Holcomb is wrong." Clara faced them both, her dark eyes blazing with conviction. "This is alkaloid poisoning. I'm certain of it." "How can you be certain?" Eli asked. Clara was quiet for a long moment, seeming to wrestle with herself. Finally, she spoke. "Because I've seen it before. Many times." She led them to the feed storage, where she carefully examined the hay and grain. "Here," she said, pulling out a clump of dried plants mixed with the hay. "Larkspur. And here, death commas. Someone mixed poisonous plants into your feed." "That's impossible," Jed protested. "I check every delivery myself." "When was the last delivery?" Clara asked. 3 days ago, but I inspected it, like always." Clara studied the contaminated feed more closely. "The poisonous plants are distributed evenly throughout. This wasn't accidental contamination. Someone deliberately mixed this in after delivery." Eli's face darkened. "Rourke. Has to be. He's getting desperate since we exposed his other schemes." "We need to act quickly," Clara said. "The cattle that are still standing have a chance, but only if we treat them immediately." "Treat them how?" Eli asked. "Holcomb said—" "Dr. Holcomb is a good man, but he's never encountered this specific type of poisoning." Clara took a deep breath. "I have, and I know how to treat it." "Then tell us what to do." Clara outlined what they needed: activated charcoal to absorb the remaining poison, specific herbs to counteract the alkaloid effects, and constant care through the night. It would be exhausting work with no guarantee of success. "Where did you learn all this?" Jed asked, suspicion and hope warring in his voice. "From someone who believed knowledge should have no boundaries." Clara replied, "Now, are we going to stand here talking, or are we going to save these animals?" They worked through the afternoon and into the night. Clara showed them how to make a slurry of activated charcoal, how to administer it to the struggling cattle, how to mix the herbal preparations she prescribed. It was backbreaking work, made harder by the animals' distress and their own exhaustion. As they worked, word spread. By evening, a small crowd had gathered at the ranch's edge, some genuinely concerned neighbors, others clearly hoping to witness Eli Callahan's final downfall. Among them, Clara spotted several of Rourke's men, watching with satisfied smirks. Margaret Doyle arrived as the sun was setting, her father conspicuously absent. She surveyed the scene with a mixture of disgust and vindication. "This is what comes of pride. Eli," she announced, making sure her voice carried. "You could have sold to Mr. Rourke when he made his generous offer. Now look at you, covered in filth, taking orders from a—" She glanced at Clara with contempt. "Well, I suppose you've made your choice." "I have," Eli said quietly, not pausing in his work. "And I'd make it again." Margaret's perfect features twisted. "Then you're a fool. My father was willing to extend your loan out of respect for our engagement. But after this spectacle, consider that offer withdrawn." "Margaret," Eli straightened, meeting her gaze steadily. "I think we both know our engagement has been a facade for months. Your heart was never in it, and neither was mine." "How dare you—" "I release you from any obligation," Eli continued. "You're free to find a husband more suited to your ambitions." Margaret's face flushed red, then white. "You're releasing me? I'm the one ending this, Eli Callahan. And when your ranch is sold at auction, when you're left with nothing, remember, you chose this. You chose her over everything." She stormed off, and despite everything, Eli felt a weight lift from his shoulders, one less pretense to maintain. Through the night they worked. Clara never faltered, moving from animal to animal with steady hands and endless patience. She showed a remarkable ability to calm the distressed cattle, speaking to them in low, soothing tones while administering treatment. Around midnight, Silas Rourke himself appeared, flanked by several of his men. He surveyed the scene with poorly concealed satisfaction. "We heard you had some trouble, Callahan," he said, not bothering to hide his smirk. "Shame about your cattle. I suppose my offer to buy the healthy ones is off the table now." "Get off my land, Rourke," Eli growled. Now, no need for hostility. I'm here as a concerned neighbor." Rourke's eyes glittered maliciously. "Though I must say, trusting your livestock to an untrained woman seems foolish. When they all die, you'll have only yourself to blame." "They're not going to die," Clara said calmly, not looking up from the cow she was treating. Rourke laughed. "Listen to her. Does she think she's a veterinarian now? Know your place, girl." "I know my place," Clara replied. "It's here, helping save these animals from the poison someone put in their feed." The laughter died on Rourke's lips. "Poison? That's a serious accusation." "Yes," Eli said, standing to his full height. "It is. And when the sheriff investigates, I wonder what he'll find." "You can't prove anything," Rourke snarled, but there was uncertainty in his eyes now. "We'll see about that," Eli replied. "Now get off my property before I throw you off." After Rourke and his men left, they continued their desperate work. By dawn, exhaustion weighed on them like lead blankets. But something had changed. The cattle that remained standing seemed stronger. The trembling had stopped in most, and they were beginning to drink water again. Dr. Holcomb returned as the sun rose, clearly expecting to find a field of dead cattle. His jaw dropped at the scene before him. "This is impossible," he muttered, examining the recovering animals. "They should be dead." "They would be if we'd followed your advice," Jed said with satisfaction. "But how?" Holcomb turned to Clara, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by genuine curiosity. "What did you do?" Clara explained her treatment, showing him the poisonous plants she'd found in the feed. As she spoke, Holcomb's expression shifted from skepticism to amazement to something approaching respect. "Activated charcoal for alkaloid poisoning," he mused. "I've heard of such treatments back east, but never seen them applied. Where did you study veterinary medicine?" "I didn't study it formally," Clara admitted, "but I learned from someone who did." "Well," Holcomb cleared his throat, clearly struggling with his pride. "It seems I owe you an apology, Miss Mayfield, Clara Mayfield. Miss Mayfield, you've saved these animals with knowledge I didn't possess. Perhaps you might share more of what you know, for the benefit of all the ranchers in the area." It was a monumental admission from the proud old veterinarian. Clara inclined her head graciously. "I would be honored, Dr. Holcomb." By mid-morning, the crisis had passed. They'd lost 8 cattle, a painful blow, but far better than the total loss they'd faced. The surviving animals were weak but recovering, and the contaminated feed had been isolated for evidence. Sheriff McKenna arrived to investigate, taking samples and statements. The poisonous plants mixed into the feed were clear evidence of sabotage, and combined with Tom Harker's testimony about Rourke's schemes, it painted a damning picture. As the sheriff prepared to leave, he pulled Eli aside. "This is attempted destruction of property on a massive scale," he said quietly. "Rourke's going to face serious charges, but he's got money for good lawyers. You'll need to be prepared for a fight." "I'll be ready," Eli assured him. After everyone had gone, Eli found Clara sitting on the porch steps, finally allowing her exhaustion to show. He settled his large frame beside her, the steps creaking under his weight. "You saved my ranch," he said simply. "Again." We saved it," Clara corrected. "Together." "Still." Eli was quiet for a moment. "I need to know something. This knowledge you have, it's not something you picked up casually. Who taught you?" Clara was silent for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then quietly, "Dr. Josiah Freeman. He was born into slavery but earned his freedom and became a physician. One of the few of our race allowed to practice medicine. He took me in when I was 12, taught me everything: reading, writing, mathematics, medicine for both humans and animals. He said knowledge was the only thing they couldn't take from us." "What happened to him?" "He died 5 years ago. His nephew inherited everything, including..." She paused. "Including me. He sold me within a week to pay gambling debts." "I'm sorry," Eli said, and meant it. "Dr. Freeman used to say that knowledge carries responsibility, that we must use what we learn to help others, to make the world better." Clara looked out over the ranch, where cattle grazed peacefully in the morning sun. "Today, I honored his memory." "You did more than that," Eli said softly. "You proved that courage comes in many forms." They sat in companionable silence as the ranch awoke around them. There would be challenges ahead: legal battles, financial struggles, social censure. But for now, in this moment, they had won. And in winning, something had fundamentally shifted between them. What had begun as a business arrangement, complicated by the ugly realities of their time, was transforming into something deeper: partnership, respect, and perhaps, though neither was ready to name it yet, something more. The sun climbed higher, promising another hot day in the Texas Hill Country. But for the first time in months, Eli Callahan faced it with hope, and beside him, Clara Mayfield allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Dr. Freeman would be proud. It's part 5, The Courage to Break the Silence. Clara stood at the window of her small room, watching the sun paint the eastern hills gold. 3 days had passed since the poisoning crisis, and while the surviving cattle were recovering, she could feel the weight of unspoken words pressing down on the ranch like the heat before a storm. She knew what she had to do. The knowledge she possessed could save not just the remaining cattle, but potentially the entire ranch. But speaking up meant risking everything. Her position here, the fragile respect she'd earned, perhaps even her safety. In her experience, people didn't always react well when those they considered beneath them proved to be their betters in knowledge. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Clara?" It was Jed's gravelly voice. "Boss wants to see you in the study." She found Eli hunched over his desk, surrounded by papers, his large hands running through his hair in frustration. He looked up as she entered, and she was struck by how tired he appeared, not just physically, but soul-deep weary. "More bills?" he said simply. "The feed company wants payment for the contaminated shipment, even though it nearly killed my herd. Says it's not their fault what happened after delivery." Clara moved closer, studying the documents. "May I?" He gestured wordlessly, and she picked up the papers, reading carefully. As she read, her frown deepened. "This isn't just about the recent shipment," she said slowly. "They're claiming you owe for 6 months of deliveries." "Which I've paid for," Eli said, "but conveniently they have no record of my payments." Clara set the papers down carefully. "Mr. Callahan, there's something I need to tell you, about what I know, about who I really am." Eli leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. "I'm listening." She took a breath, then began. "Dr. Freeman didn't just teach me to read and write. For 15 years, I was his assistant in everything. I helped him maintain his practice accounts, correspondence with medical suppliers, even some legal documents. I learned to spot forgeries, trace financial irregularities, and build cases for court proceedings." "Go on," Eli encouraged when she paused. Before I came here, I spent 6 months with a family in Missouri, the Weatherbys. Mr. Weatherby was being cheated by his business partners, but he couldn't prove it. I helped him uncover the fraud. We won the case." "What happened?" Clara's voice went flat. "His partners were powerful men. They couldn't attack him directly after the court ruling, so they attacked me. Had me arrested on false charges, claimed I'd stolen from the household. Mr. Weatherby tried to defend me, but," she shrugged, "a black woman's word against white businessmen. I was sold to cover the damages." Eli's hands clenched into fists. "That's not justice." "No," Clara agreed quietly. "But it's the world we live in." She straightened her shoulders. "The point is, I can help you. Really help you, not just with treating sick animals, but with fighting back against Rourke and anyone else trying to destroy this ranch. But I need you to trust me. And I need to know you'll stand by me if things get complicated." Eli stood, and even though Clara was tall for a woman, she had to look up to meet his eyes. "Clara Mayfield," he said solemnly, "you've already saved my cattle twice over. You've shown more courage and intelligence than anyone I've ever met. If you're willing to help, then I'm willing to stand by you. Come what may." The weight that had been pressing on Clara's chest eased slightly. "Then we have work to do. First, we need to examine every financial document from the past year. I suspect the feed company conspiracy goes deeper than just lost payment records." They spent the rest of the morning going through papers, Clara's trained eye catching discrepancies Eli had missed. She showed him how signatures had been subtly altered, how numbers had been changed, how entire transactions had been fabricated. "Look here," she said, pointing to a receipt. "This claims you received 40 bales of hay on March 15th. But see this other document? It shows 30 bales delivered the same day. Someone's been inflating your orders and pocketing the difference. Who? Henderson, Eli growled, naming the feed company owner. He's been working with Rourke all along. More than that, Clara said, I believe Margaret's father, Mr. Doyle, is involved too. These banking irregularities, they follow a pattern. Every time you've had a setback, there's been a corresponding error in your loan calculations. As they worked, Jed brought news that set Clara's plan in motion faster than she'd anticipated. Sheriff's here, he announced. Wants to talk about pressing charges against Rourke. Sheriff McKenna was a fair man, but Clara could see his skepticism when Eli suggested she present their financial evidence. No offense, Callahan, the sheriff said, but this is complex legal territory. Maybe you should hire a proper lawyer. Clara understands these documents better than any lawyer I could afford, Eli said firmly. I trust her judgment. The sheriff looked dubious but nodded. All right then, show me what you've got. For the next hour, Clara methodically laid out the evidence. She showed how the forgeries connected, how the financial manipulation had been orchestrated, how even the poisoned feed could be traced back through a paper trail to Rourke's money. As she spoke, she saw the sheriff's expression change from skepticism to interest to outright amazement. Hey, this is extraordinary, he said finally. You've built a stronger case than the prosecutor in the county seat. Where did you train in law? I didn't, Clara said simply. But I learned that justice requires proof, and proof requires careful observation. Well, The sheriff gathered up the documents. This changes everything. With evidence like this, Rourke won't just face charges for the poisoning. This is conspiracy, fraud, attempted theft on a massive scale. After he left, promising to return with the prosecutor, Clara found herself alone with Eli in the study. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. You continue to surprise me, Eli said softly. Every time I think I understand who you are, you reveal another layer. Does it disturb you? Clara asked. That I know these things. Some men find it. She searched for the right word. Uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. Eli laughed, but not unkindly. Clara, you're saving everything I've worked for, and if that makes some men uncomfortable, then they're fools. A commotion outside interrupted them. Through the window, they could see a group of riders approaching, Margaret Doyle at the lead, accompanied by her father and several tough-looking men Clara didn't recognize. I hired guns, Jed said grimly, appearing in the doorway with his rifle. Seen their type before. Eli strapped on his gun belt. Stay inside, he told Clara. No, she said firmly. Whatever this is, we face it together. They met the group on the front porch. Margaret's beautiful face was twisted with fury, while her father maintained a cold, calculating expression. Eli Callahan, Banker Doyle said formally. I'm calling in your loan. Full payment. Immediately. The loan isn't due for another week, Eli replied calmly. He'd read the fine print, Doyle smirked. I have the right to call it in early if I have reason to believe the collateral is in jeopardy. Your recent cattle losses qualify. The cattle losses caused by Rourke's sabotage, Clara said, stepping forward. Sabotage you were likely aware of, given your financial ties to his operations. Doyle's face flushed. How dare you speak to me, girl? Know your place. I know my place, Clara replied steadily. It's standing with the truth against those who would corrupt it. You've poisoned his mind, Margaret shrieked. Everything was fine until you came here. Eli would have sold to Rourke, married me, been respectable. Respectable. Eli's voice was dangerously quiet. You mean broken, controlled, owned? One of the hired guns shifted, his hand moving toward his weapon. Jed raised his rifle slightly in warning. Now, Doyle said with false calm. No need for violence. I'm simply here to collect what's owed. You have until sunset to produce the full amount, or I'll have the sheriff seize the property. Actually, a new voice said, you won't. They all turned to see Sheriff McKenna approaching with the county prosecutor and several deputies. The prosecutor, a thin man named Wallace, held a thick folder of documents. Mr. Doyle, Wallace said formally, I'll need you to come with us. We have questions about your involvement in a conspiracy to defraud Mr. Callahan. This is preposterous, Doyle blustered. I'm a respected businessman, with financial ties to Silas Rourke dating back 2 years. Wallace continued. We have evidence of coordinated efforts to manipulate Mr. Callahan's debts while Rourke sabotaged his operations. Your bank records are being subpoenaed as we speak. Margaret looked between her father and Eli, panic replacing fury. This is her doing, she pointed at Clara. She's bewitched you all. The only magic here is careful documentation, Clara said quietly. Every transaction, every forgery, every manipulation, it all leaves a trail. As the deputies led a protesting Doyle away, Margaret turned to Eli one last time. You'll regret this, she hissed. You've chosen her over everything proper society offers. You'll be outcasts, both of you. Then we'll be outcasts together, Eli replied simply. After they'd gone, leaving only dust and the echo of threats. The small group stood in silence on the porch. The weight of what had just happened, and what it meant for the future, settled over them. They're not wrong, Clara said softly. This will have consequences. Your standing in the community, your business relationships. It will be what I make of them. Eli finished. Clara, you've shown more integrity and courage than anyone in that proper society Margaret talks about. I'd rather stand with one person of true worth than 100 who measure value by the color of skin or the size of a bank account. Here, Jed added gruffly. Besides, any fool could see Miss Clara's got more sense in her little finger than the whole Doyle family combined. That evening, as the sun set over the ranch, Clara found herself back in Dr. Freeman's makeshift laboratory, or rather, the corner of the barn she'd converted for preparing medicines. She was mixing another batch of treatment for the recovering cattle when Eli appeared in the doorway. Thought I'd find you here, he said. You know, you don't have to hide away. This is your victory as much as anyone's. I'm not hiding, Clara said, not looking up from her work. Just thinking about change, about courage. She set down her mortar and pestle. When I stood on that auction block, I thought my life was over. Everything Dr. Freeman taught me, everything I'd learned, I thought it would die with me, unused and forgotten. But it didn't, Eli said softly. No, it didn't. She finally met his eyes. You asked me once about the rest of my story. The truth is, Dr. Freeman didn't just teach me medicine and letters. He taught me to hope, to believe that someday, somehow, things could be different. That knowledge and character would matter more than the circumstances of birth. He sounds like a wise man. He was, and I think he would have liked you, Eli Callahan. You have the rarest kind of courage, the kind that lets you see people for who they truly are, not what the world says they should be. Eli moved closer, and Clara was suddenly aware of his presence in a way that had nothing to do with his physical size. You give me too much credit, he said. You're the one who had the courage to speak truth when silence would have been safer. We make a good team, Clara said, a smile tugging at her lips. Yes, Eli agreed, his voice rough with emotion. We do. Outside, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. The ranch was quiet. The cattle settled for the night, the immediate threats dealt with. But both of them knew this was not an ending. It was a beginning. There would be a trial. There would be those who condemned Eli for treating Clara as an equal, who would try to tear down what they were building together. But there would also be those who saw the truth of it, that courage and intelligence and integrity knew no boundaries of race or station. Clara, Eli said suddenly, I need to say something. The papers of your purchase. I want you to know I'm having them legally dissolved. You're not property. You never were. Not in any way that matters. You're free to leave whenever you choose. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, tears she hadn't allowed herself in years. And if I choose to stay, then you stay as a free woman, as my partner in running this ranch if you're willing, and as... He paused, seeming to gather courage. As whatever else you might want to be. The words hung in the air between them, full of possibility and promise. Clara reached out and took his large, calloused hand in her smaller one. I was meant to be your slave, she said softly. But I choose to be your partner, in all things. As night fell over the Callahan ranch, two people stood together in a barn that smelled of hay and medicine and hope. They were building something new, something that defied the expectations and prejudices of their time. It would not be easy. But the most important things, the things worth fighting for, never were. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they had truth and courage and each other. And that, Clara thought as she squeezed Eli's hand, was more than enough to build a future on. Part 6. Unmasking the Conspiracy. The morning after the confrontation with the Doyles dawned crisp and clear, as if the very air had been cleansed by the previous day's revelations. Clara was examining the recovered cattle when she heard the thunder of hooves approaching. She looked up to see Sheriff McKenna riding hard toward the ranch, his face grim. Miss Mayfield, Callahan, he called out, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. We've got a problem. Tom Harker escaped custody last night. Eli emerged from the barn, his expression darkening. Escaped? How? Someone left his cell door unlocked. Guard swears he locked it proper, but... The sheriff shrugged. Harker's in the wind, and I'd bet my badge he's heading straight to Rourke. Then we need to move fast, Clara said. If Harker warns Rourke about how much we know, he'll destroy evidence. Eli finished. Sheriff, we need to search Rourke's place now. McKenna shook his head. Can't do it without a warrant, and Judge Patterson won't be back until tomorrow. Clara's mind raced. What about the feed shed? The contaminated grain had to be stored somewhere before it was mixed with our shipment. If we could find traces... The old Bracken place, Jed spoke up suddenly. Abandoned homestead on the border between Callahan and Rourke land. Seen riders heading that way at odd hours. Never thought much of it until now. Within the hour, a small party set out. Eli, Clara, the sheriff, and 2 deputies. Jed stayed behind to watch the ranch. The Bracken homestead sat in a hollow between 2 hills, its buildings weathered gray by years of neglect. But as they approached, Clara noticed signs of recent activity, fresh wagon tracks, scattered hay, and the acrid smell of chemicals. Wait, she said suddenly, dismounting. She knelt by a patch of dried grass, examining it closely. Look at this. The grass is dead in patches, but not from drought. Chemical burn. She followed the trail of dead vegetation to a dilapidated shed. Inside, they found damning evidence, bags of grain mixed with dried larkspur and death commas, ledgers detailing payments to various accomplices, and most shocking of all, correspondence between Rourke and several prominent businessmen. My God, Sheriff McKenna breathed, reading through the papers. This goes beyond just the Callahan Ranch. They've been systematically targeting small ranchers throughout the county. Building a monopoly? Clara said quietly. Drive out the small operators, buy the land cheap, control the market. Eli's face was like stone as he read names on the letters. Henderson from the feed store, Wallace from the freight company. Even Judge Patterson's name is here. That explains why getting warrants has been so difficult, the sheriff muttered. This is bigger than I can handle alone. We need federal marshals. A sound outside made them all freeze. Through a crack in the wall, Clara saw riders approaching, Rourke's men, armed and moving with purpose. We're outnumbered, one of the deputies whispered. And trapped, added the other. Clara's mind worked quickly. Sheriff, how far away are those federal marshals? Fort Worth, 2 days' ride, minimum. Then we need to buy time. She turned to Eli. Do you trust me? With my life, he said without hesitation. Then follow my lead. Clara stepped out of the shed, hands visible but near the medical bag she always carried. Gentlemen, she called out clearly. I believe you're looking for us. The riders reined in, surprised by her bold appearance. She recognized several faces from town, including Wade Simmons, Tom Harker's accomplice. Well, well, Simmons drawled. The uppity woman who thinks she's better than her station. Mr. Rourke will be pleased we found you. Found us? Clara smiled. We're not hiding. In fact, we're conducting a medical inspection. Medical inspection? Simmons frowned. Of course. Clara's voice took on a professional tone. Haven't you heard? There's been an outbreak of Texas fever in the county. The sheriff requested I inspect all abandoned buildings where infected cattle might have been hidden. Texas fever? One of the men shifted nervously in his saddle. They all knew how devastating the disease could be. Clara pulled a cloth from her bag, dousing it with a strong-smelling solution. I'm afraid this entire area shows signs of contamination. See the dead grass? Classic symptom of diseased cattle droppings. You gentlemen should leave immediately unless you want to risk carrying the infection back to your own herds. The riders exchanged uncertain glances. Texas fever could destroy a ranch in weeks. She's bluffing. Simmons snarled, but doubt colored his voice. Am I? Clara walked calmly to a patch of chemically burned grass. This discoloration, the scattered bone fragments over there, the smell, all signs of infected carcasses hastily buried. I was just about to recommend the sheriff quarantine this entire area. Quarantine? Another rider backed his horse away. For how long? Standard procedure is 30 days, Clara replied smoothly. No one in or out. Of course, if you gentlemen want to enter the shed and risk exposure. More horses backed away. These were working cowboys, men who knew the value of healthy cattle and the devastation disease could bring. The boss ain't paying us enough to risk Texas fever, one muttered. Simmons glared at them, then at Clara. You think you're clever, don't you? I think I'm a medical professional doing my job, Clara replied evenly. Now, unless you want Dr. Holcomb to examine your herds for symptoms. That did it. The mention of the veterinarian inspecting their animals sent the remaining riders wheeling their horses around. Even Simmons, after a last venomous look, followed his men. As soon as they were out of sight, Eli let out a breath he'd been holding. Texas fever, that was brilliant. It won't hold them for long, Clara warned. Once they talk to someone who knows better. Then we'd better move fast, Sheriff McKenna said. He turned to one of his deputies. Ride hard for Fort Worth. Tell the federal marshals we've uncovered a conspiracy involving a judge. Go! As the deputy galloped away, they quickly gathered the most damning evidence. Clara insisted on taking samples of the poisoned grain, carefully sealed in glass vials from her medical supplies. For court, she explained. Chemical analysis will prove the deliberate contamination. They were loading the evidence when Jed arrived. riding hard and leading extra horses. Figured you might need these, he panted. And we got trouble. Rourke himself is heading this way with a dozen men. Maybe more. Hey, how long? Eli asked. 20 minutes, maybe less. They mounted quickly, but as they crested the hill above the Bracken place, they could see dust clouds from two directions. Rourke from the east, and another group from the north. You were cut off? The sheriff said grimly. No, Clara said, studying the terrain. There's another way, through Devil's Canyon. That's suicide, Jed protested. Narrow trail, steep drops. I've studied every inch of this country from your maps. Clara said, it's dangerous, but passable if we're careful, or we can stay and fight 20 men. Eli looked at the sheriff, who nodded grimly. Lead the way, Miss Mayfield. The trail into Devil's Canyon was barely wide enough for a horse, winding between towering rock walls. They rode single file, Clara in the lead, calling back warnings about loose rocks and narrow turns. Behind them, they could hear shouts as Rourke's men discovered their escape route. They're following, Jed called from the rear. Good, Clara replied. The narrower the trail gets, the more it favors us. She was right. As the canyon deepened, their pursuers were forced to slow, unable to rush without risking their horses on the treacherous path. But just as Clara thought they might escape cleanly, a shot rang out, the bullet sparking off the rock near her head. Down! Eli shouted, spurring his horse forward to shield her. More shots followed, echoing in the confined space. One of the deputies cried out, clutching his shoulder. Keep moving, Sheriff McKenna ordered. We're almost through. They burst from the canyon onto open ground, horses lathered and breathing hard. The Callahan ranch was visible in the distance, but their pursuers were close behind. Make for the ranch, Eli shouted. We can defend there. They rode hard across the open ground, Rourke's men streaming from the canyon behind them. Clara stayed low over her horse's neck, aware of bullets whistling past. The wounded deputy swayed in his saddle, and she moved her mount closer to steady him. They thundered into the ranch yard to find it already prepared for defense. Word had spread, and several neighboring ranchers had arrived, men who'd suffered their own losses to Rourke's schemes and were ready to make a stand. Inside, Eli commanded, half carrying the wounded deputy. Clara immediately went to work on the man's shoulder, her steady hands cleaning and bandaging the wound while chaos erupted outside. Through the window, she could see Rourke's men taking positions, clearly preparing for a siege. We can hold them, Eli said, checking his rifle, but not forever. We don't need forever, Clara replied, tying off the bandage. Just until the federal marshals arrive. That's 2 days, Sheriff McKenna pointed out. Then we'd better make ourselves comfortable, Clara said with a calmness she didn't entirely feel. The first assault came at dusk. Rourke's men rushed the house, but the defenders were ready, driving them back with steady rifle fire. Clara moved among the wounded, treating injuries with the same focused intensity she'd shown with the poisoned cattle. During a lull, Silas Rourke himself rode forward under a white flag. He was a thin, sharp-featured man with cold eyes and an air of barely controlled rage. Callahan, he called out, you've got something that belongs to me. Return those papers and we can end this peacefully. Nothing here belongs to you, Rourke, Eli replied from the doorway. Except maybe a cell next to your friend Doyle. You think you've won? Rourke's laugh was ugly. I own half this county. Judges, lawmen, businessmen, they're all in my pocket. Whatever evidence you think you have will disappear, and you'll be the ones facing charges. The federal marshals might see it differently. Sheriff McKenna called out. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Rourke's face. You're bluffing, are we? Clara stepped into view beside Eli. Just like I was bluffing about the Texas fever? Your men believed that readily enough. Rourke's face darkened. You. This is all you're doing. A woman like you, putting ideas above her station, corrupting good men. The only corruption here is yours, Clara interrupted calmly. And it's documented in detail. Chemical formulas for the poison, financial records, correspondence with your conspirators, all preserved and witnessed by a federal judge. That last part was a lie, but Rourke didn't know that. His face went pale, then flushed with rage. You've got 1 hour, he snarled. Surrender the evidence or we burn you out. After he rode back to his men, the defenders prepared for the worst. Clara helped barricade windows while Eli distributed ammunition. The neighboring ranchers, men who'd initially looked at her with suspicion, now followed her suggestions without question, having seen her courage and competence. Never thought I'd be taking orders from a colored woman, one grizzled rancher admitted, helping her move a heavy table. But you've got more sand than most men I know. Crisis has a way of clarifying what really matters, Clara replied. As darkness fell, flames appeared in the distance. Rourke's men had set fire to the hay barn. It was far enough from the main house to not pose immediate danger. But the message was clear. He means to starve us out, Jed observed. Or burn us out, Eli added grimly. Clara was treating another wounded defender when she noticed something. The wind had shifted, blowing smoke from the burning barn directly toward Rourke's positions. Eli, she said urgently, the smoke! It's giving us cover. He understood immediately. Under cover of the thick smoke, they could potentially move some defenders to the bunkhouse, creating a crossfire position. It's risky, he said. Everything we're doing is risky, Clara pointed out. They made the move, several men slipping through the smoke to the bunkhouse. When Rourke's next assault came, the attackers found themselves caught between two positions, forcing another retreat. Dawn of the second day brought a tense standoff. The wounded deputy's fever had broken thanks to Clara's care, and morale among the defenders remained strong. But ammunition was running low, and Rourke's men showed no signs of giving up. It was then that Clara remembered something. The chemicals, she said suddenly. The poisoned grain samples I took, they're not just evidence. What do you mean? Eli asked. Some of those compounds, when burned, produce toxic smoke. Not lethal, but enough to drive men back. She looked at him steadily. It's dangerous, but it might buy us the time we need. Do it, Eli said without hesitation. Clara worked quickly, mixing chemicals from her medical supplies with the contaminated grain samples. The resulting compound, when thrown into the still smoldering barn fire, produced thick, acrid smoke that the wind carried directly into Rourke's lines. The effect was immediate. Men began coughing, eyes streaming, horses rearing in distress. Several riders broke and ran, despite Rourke's shouted orders. What did you do? Sheriff McKenna asked, watching the chaos. Turned their own weapon against them, Clara replied. The same chemicals they used to poison cattle are now making their position untenable. It was late afternoon when the dust clouds appeared on the horizon, not from one direction, but from two. Rourke's men saw it too, and uncertainty rippled through their ranks. Federal marshals! The cry went up from the defenders as the lead riders became visible, the sun glinting off their badges. But the second dust cloud resolved into something unexpected. Dr. Holcomb leading a group of townspeople, including several prominent citizens. We've come to stand with Callahan, the veterinarian called out. This woman saved my reputation by teaching me new medicine. Any man who'd harm her or Callahan will answer to us. Caught between federal law and aroused townspeople. Rourke's men began melting away. Rourke himself tried to flee but was quickly surrounded by marshals. As the federal agents took Rourke and his remaining men into custody, Clara finally allowed herself to sink into a chair, exhaustion overwhelming her. She'd been on her feet for nearly 2 days, treating wounds, mixing chemicals, and coordinating defenses. "It's over," Eli said, sitting beside her. His large hand covered hers, warm and steady. "No," Clara corrected softly. "It's just beginning. The trial, rebuilding the ranch, facing those who'll never accept me as your equal. Then we'll face them together," Eli said simply. "Like we face this together?" Sheriff McKenna approached, hat in hand. "Miss Mayfield, I owe you an apology. When you first started talking about evidence and conspiracies, I thought, well, I didn't think you could know what you claim to know." "Many people make that assumption," Clara said without rancor. "I've learned not to take it personally." "Well, you've opened my eyes. The federal prosecutor wants to speak with you about testifying. Says your evidence and testimony will be crucial to the case." As the sheriff walked away, Dr. Holcomb took his place. "Miss Mayfield, I've been thinking. The county needs someone with your knowledge. I'm not getting younger. And what you know about animal medicine. Would you consider working with me? Officially?" Clara's eyes widened. "You're offering me a position despite—" "Despite nothing," Holcomb interrupted. "Medicine doesn't care about color, only competence. And you, young woman, are more competent than anyone I've met." Clara looked at Eli, uncertain. "Say yes," Eli urged. "The ranch needs a veterinarian, and the county needs your knowledge." "Then yes," Clara said, a smile breaking across her face. "Yes, I'd be honored." As the sun set over the Callahan Ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Clara stood on the porch watching the federal marshals lead Rourke away in chains. The evidence she'd helped uncover would dismantle a conspiracy that had destroyed dozens of families. Justice, long delayed, was finally being served. "You saved more than just my ranch," Eli said, joining her. "You saved this whole county from those who'd corrupt it." "We saved it," Clara corrected, "and now we rebuild it, better than before." "Together," Eli agreed, and in that word was a promise, a commitment, and perhaps something more. The battle was won, but Clara knew the war for acceptance, for equality, for the right to use her knowledge freely, would continue. But standing there with Eli, surrounded by neighbors who'd learned to see past color to character, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not just for survival, but for a future where knowledge and character truly would matter more than the circumstances of birth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, they had won more than a physical battle. They had proven that courage, intelligence, and integrity could triumph over prejudice and greed. And that, Clara thought as she watched the stars appear in the darkening sky, was a victory worth any risk. Part 7. The Collapse of Enemies and Change of Hearts. The courthouse in Cedar Ridge had never seen such a crowd. Every seat was filled, with more people standing along the walls and spilling out onto the street. The trial of Silas Rourke and his conspirators had drawn attention from across the state, and at the center of it all sat Clara Mayfield, composed despite the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her. She wore her best dress, a simple but dignified navy blue that Dr. Holcomb's wife had insisted on buying for her. "If you're going to represent the future of veterinary medicine in this county," Mrs. Holcomb had said firmly, "you'll do it looking professional." Eli sat in the front row, his presence a steady anchor in the sea of faces. Some looked at Clara with curiosity, others with skepticism, and a few with barely concealed hostility. But she kept her eyes forward, focused on the task at hand. The federal prosecutor, a sharp-eyed man named Harrison, called her to the stand. As Clara rose, A murmur ran through the crowd. This was unprecedented. A woman of color serving as a key witness in a federal case. "State your name for the record," Harrison began. "Clara Mayfield." "And your occupation?" "I serve as assistant to Dr. Holcomb in veterinary matters, and I help manage the financial records for the Callahan Ranch." More murmurs. Harrison raised a hand for silence. "Miss Mayfield, please tell the court how you first became aware of the conspiracy to defraud local ranchers." Clara spoke clearly and precisely, detailing her observations of the forged documents, the pattern of sabotage, and the poisoned feed. She produced her notebook, explaining each entry, each piece of evidence. "Objection!" Rourke's lawyer, a pompous man named Whitman, rose. "This witness lacks the credentials to make such technical observations. How can we trust the testimony of someone without formal education?" Before Harrison could respond, Clara spoke. "May I address that concern, Your Honor?" Judge Brennan, a federal appointee known for his fairness, nodded. "Proceed." "Mr. Whitman is correct that I lack formal credentials," Clara said calmly. "However, I spent 15 years studying under Dr. Josiah Freeman, one of the few men of color permitted to practice medicine in Missouri. I can demonstrate my knowledge if the court wishes." "That won't be necessary," Whitman began, but Judge Brennan cut him off. "Actually, I think it would be illuminating. Mr. Harrison, do you have any of the evidence Miss Mayfield analyzed?" The prosecutor produced several documents. For the next hour, Clara methodically demonstrated her expertise, explaining the chemical composition of the poisons, the patterns in the forged signatures, and the financial manipulations hidden in the seemingly legitimate paperwork. When she finished, even Whitman looked shaken. The evidence was simply too comprehensive, too detailed to dismiss. But the real drama came when Margaret Doyle was called to testify. She entered the courtroom in a rustle of silk and lace, her beauty unmarred but her confidence clearly shaken. Her father's arrest and the seizure of the bank's assets had left her in greatly reduced circumstances. "Miss Doyle," Harrison began, "you were engaged to Mr. Eli Callahan during the period in question?" "I was," Margaret replied, shooting a venomous glance at Clara. "And were you aware of your father's business dealings with Mr. Rourke?" Margaret hesitated. Her lawyer had clearly coached her, but faced with the evidence already presented, she had few options. "I may have overheard certain conversations." "May have," Harrison pressed. "Miss Doyle, I remind you that you're under oath. Were you or were you not aware that your father and Mr. Rourke were conspiring to force Mr. Callahan into bankruptcy?" The courtroom held its breath. Margaret's face flushed, then paled. Finally, her shoulders sagged. "Yes," she whispered. "I knew." The admission sent shockwaves through the crowd. Harrison pressed his advantage. "And did you share this information with Mr. Rourke?" I wanted Eli to sell." Margaret's voice grew stronger, defensive. "The ranch was failing. It would have been better for everyone if he'd just accepted Mr. Rourke's offer. I told Mr. Rourke about Eli's financial situation. Yes, about when he was most vulnerable." "So you actively participated in the conspiracy against your own fiancé?" Margaret's composure finally cracked. "He was going to lose everything anyway. At least if he sold to Rourke, he'd have had something left. But then she came along." She pointed at Clara, her voice rising. "Everything changed when he bought her. Suddenly he didn't need me anymore, didn't need my father's money. She poisoned him against us." "The only poison here," Judge Brennan said sternly, "was in the feed that nearly killed Mr. Callahan's cattle. Miss Doyle, your testimony has been most enlightening. You may step down." As Margaret left the stand, she paused near Clara. For a moment, Their eyes met. Clara saw many things there. Anger, yes, but also something else. Perhaps a glimmer of understanding of what she had lost by choosing greed over integrity. The trial continued for 3 more days. Witness after witness testified to the extent of Rourke's schemes. Other ranchers who'd been forced to sell. Businessmen who'd been pressured to participate. The evidence Clara had compiled proved crucial in connecting all the pieces. On the final day, something unexpected happened. As Clara was leaving the courthouse, a group of women approached her. She tensed, prepared for confrontation. But their leader, Mrs. Patterson, the minister's wife, extended her hand. "Miss Mayfield," she said formally, "we owe you an apology and our thanks." Clara blinked in surprise. "I don't understand." "My nephew lost his ranch last year," Mrs. Patterson explained. "We thought it was bad luck, poor management. Now we know it was Rourke's doing. You've shown us the truth." Another woman stepped forward. "My husband owns the mercantile. Rourke was pressuring him to refuse credit to certain ranchers. Thanks to your testimony, my husband found the courage to come forward." One by one, the women shared their stories. Not all were ready to fully accept Clara. She could see reservation in some eyes, but it was a beginning. That evening, Clara found Eli on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sunset. The trial's outcome was all but certain. Rourke would face years in federal prison. His assets would be distributed among his victims, and the conspiracy would be dismantled. "Quite a day," Eli said as she joined him. "Yes," Clara agreed, sinking into the chair beside him. "I never expected the women today." "You've changed things," Eli said simply. "Shown people what's possible. That's made some folks uncomfortable, but it's made others think." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from gold to crimson to deep purple. Finally, Eli spoke again. "Clara, there's something I need to say, something I should have said before now." She turned to him, noting the unusual nervousness in his expression. "When I bought your papers at that auction, I thought I was just getting help for the ranch. I never imagined, never dreamed." He took a deep breath. "Clara Mayfield, you've saved my ranch, my reputation, and probably my life. But more than that, you've shown me what real partnership means. What it means to stand with someone as a true equal." "Eli," Clara began, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish. I had those papers dissolved, made you a free woman-in-law. But I realize now you were always free in every way that mattered. Your mind, your spirit, your courage, those were never mine to own. They were gifts you chose to share." He stood, then did something that made Clara's breath catch. The giant of a man knelt before her, taking her hand gently in his massive ones. "Clara Mayfield, I'm asking you as a free woman, as my equal in every way, will you marry me? Not because you need protection, not because society expects it, but because I can't imagine facing another day without you beside me, as my wife, my partner, my love." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. In all her years of bondage, through all the pain and struggle, she had never dared dream of this moment. A man offering not just marriage, but true partnership. Acknowledgement not just of her freedom, but of her worth. "Yes," she whispered, then stronger. "Yes, Eli Callahan, I'll marry you." He rose, pulling her up with him, and for a moment they stood face to face in the dying light. When he kissed her, it was gentle, respectful, but with a promise of deeper passion to come. "There will be difficulties," Clara said when they finally parted. "Not everyone will accept this." "Then we'll face them together," Eli replied, "like we've faced everything else." The next morning brought the expected verdict, guilty on all counts. Rourke was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. His conspirators received lesser sentences, but still substantial. The seized assets would be distributed among the victims, giving many ruined ranchers a chance to rebuild. But for Clara, the more significant moment came a week later in Dr. Holcomb's office. The old veterinarian had called a meeting of all the local ranchers. "Gentlemen," he began, "and ladies," nodding to the few women present, "I'm not getting younger. My eyes aren't what they were, my hands not as steady. It's time I took on a full partner, someone who's already proven her worth 10 times over." He turned to Clara. "Miss Mayfield, soon to be Mrs. Callahan, I'm offering you full partnership in my practice, equal say in all decisions, equal share in all proceeds. The county needs your knowledge, and I need your help." The room was silent. This was unprecedented. A woman, a person of color, as a full partner in a professional practice. Clara could feel the weight of history in that moment. "I accept," she said clearly. "On one condition, we establish a fund to train others, anyone with the aptitude and desire regardless of their background. Knowledge should have no boundaries." Holcomb smiled. "Agreed." There were murmurs around the room, some approving, others less so. But when Eli stood beside her, his presence a silent challenge to any who would object, the murmurs died away. "I'll be her first student," a young voice piped up. Clara turned to see Ben Morrison, the teenage son of one of the ranchers. "If she'll have me. I want to learn animal medicine." "Me too," added another youth. And just like that, the dam broke. Not everyone was ready to accept the change, but enough were that Clara saw the future she dreamed of beginning to take shape. The wedding was set for the following month. As Clara worked with Dr. Holcomb, learning the business side of the practice while teaching him new medical techniques, she often thought of Dr. Freeman. He would be proud, she knew, not just of what she'd accomplished, but of how she'd used her knowledge to help, to heal, to lift others up. One evening, as she was preparing to leave the clinic, she found an unexpected visitor waiting. Margaret Doyle. The former belle looked different, her finery replaced by simple clothing, her haughty expression softened by recent hardships. "I suppose you've come to gloat," Margaret said without preamble. "No," Clara replied simply, "I take no pleasure in anyone's misfortune." Margaret studied her for a long moment. "I hated you," she said finally. "Not just because of your race, but because you had something I never did. Strength, real strength, not the kind that comes from money or position, but from inside." "You have strength too," Clara said gently. "You're here, aren't you? That took courage." Margaret's laugh was bitter. "I'm here because I have nowhere else to go. No money, no prospects, no skills except looking pretty and managing a household." Clara was quiet for a moment, then made a decision that surprised them both. "Can you read and write well?" "Of course." "Can you keep accounts, manage schedules?" Yes. I managed Father's household for years. Dr. Holcomb and I need someone to manage the clinic's records and appointments. The pay won't be what you're used to, but it's honest work, if you're interested." Margaret's eyes widened. "You'd hire me after everything?" "Everyone deserves a second chance," Clara said. "Dr. Freeman taught me that. The question is, are you willing to work for a woman you once considered beneath you?" Margaret was silent for a long time. Then, slowly, she nodded. Yes, I am." As Clara walked home to the ranch that evening, she reflected on the strange turns life could take. She'd begun this journey in chains, sold like property. Now she was a professional woman, engaged to marry a man who saw her as an equal, helping to build a community where knowledge and character mattered more than the circumstances of birth. The transformation wasn't complete, might never be complete in her lifetime. There would always be those who saw her color before her competence, who resented her rise. But change was happening, one person at a time, one choice at a time. And that, Clara thought as she saw Eli waiting for her on the porch, was how the world changed, not in grand sweeps, but in individual moments of courage, compassion, and choice. "Good day?" Eli asked, wrapping his arms around her. "A surprising day," Clara replied and told him about Margaret. Eli whistled low. "That's generous of you, considering we all have the capacity to change," Clara said, "when sometimes we just need the opportunity." "Speaking of opportunities," Eli said, a smile playing at his lips, "Jed's been asking when we're going to start building that new addition to the house. Says if we're going to have a proper clinic and maybe a family someday, we'll need more room." Clara felt warmth bloom in her chest. A family. Children who would grow up free, educated, seeing a world where their mother was respected for her knowledge and their father for his integrity. "Tell Jed to start whenever he's ready," she said, as night fell over the Callahan ranch. Clara stood with Eli looking out over land that had been saved by courage, partnership, and the power of truth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new patients, new students eager to learn. But tonight, she was simply a woman in love, standing with the man who'd seen her worth when the world saw only her chains. Together, they'd face down conspiracy and prejudice. Together, they'd build something new. And that was just the beginning. Part 8, an ending opening to the future. The morning of Clara and Eli's wedding dawned clear and bright, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers across the Texas hills. The Callahan Ranch had been transformed, tables set up under the oak trees, ribbons fluttering from branches, and the barn cleared and decorated for dancing. It was simple but beautiful, much like the love it celebrated. Clara stood before the mirror in what had once been Eli's sister's room, now hers, wearing a dress of ivory silk that Mrs. Holcomb had commissioned from the finest seamstress in Fort Worth. "Every bride deserves to feel beautiful," the older woman had insisted, brushing aside Clara's protests about the expense. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting to see one of the women who'd volunteered to help with preparations. Instead, Margaret Doyle entered, carrying a small box. She'd been working at the clinic for 3 weeks now, and while their relationship remained formal, a mutual respect had developed. "I thought you might want to borrow this," Margaret said quietly, opening the box to reveal a delicate pearl necklace. "It was my mother's. They say a bride should have something borrowed." Clara's breath caught. "Margaret, I couldn't—" "Please," Margaret interrupted. "I need to do this, to prove to myself that I've truly changed, that I can see you for who you are, a woman of intelligence and grace who's earned every happiness." With gentle hands, Margaret fastened the pearls around Clara's neck. For a moment, the two women who had once been positioned as enemies stood side by side in the mirror, one blonde and pale, one dark and strong, but both simply women finding their way in a changing world. "Thank you," Clara said softly. Margaret nodded, then surprised them both by adding, "You look beautiful. Eli Callahan is a fortunate man." Downstairs, the ranch was bustling with activity. The guest list had grown beyond their original plans as news of the wedding spread. Some came out of genuine support, others out of curiosity, and a few, Clara suspected, to witness what they assumed would be a scandal. Among the early arrivals was Sheriff McKenna, his badge polished to a shine. "Wanted to make sure there's no trouble," he told Eli, though his smile suggested he expected none. The federal marshal's presence during the trial had made it clear that Clara and Eli had powerful protection. Dr. Holcomb was there too, beaming with pride. "Never thought I'd see such a day," he confided to anyone who'd listen. "But then, Clara's taught me to expect the unexpected." The ceremony was held under the largest oak tree, with Reverend Morrison, Ben's father, presiding. He'd initially been hesitant when asked to perform the service, but his son's enthusiasm for learning from Clara had helped change his mind. "If she's good enough to teach my boy," he'd said, "she's good enough to marry in the sight of God." As Clara walked down the makeshift aisle, Jed Porter at her side, she'd asked him to give her away, bringing tears to the old ranch hand's eyes. She saw the crowd's mixed reactions. Some smiled genuinely, others watched with careful neutrality, and a few frowned in disapproval. But her eyes were only for Eli, standing tall and proud at the altar, his face bright with joy. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Morrison began, his voice carrying across the gathering. "We are gathered here today to witness something extraordinary, not just the union of two people, but the joining of two souls who have proven that love, respect, and partnership can overcome any obstacle." The ceremony was simple but moving. When it came time for the vows, Eli spoke first, his deep voice steady with emotion. "Clara Mayfield, you came into my life when I was at my lowest, when I'd all but given up hope. You saved not just my ranch, but my faith in what's possible. You've shown me that true strength comes not from size or force, but from knowledge, courage, and compassion. I promise to stand beside you always, to support your dreams as you've supported mine, and to love you as my equal partner in all things." Clara's eyes misted as she spoke her own vows. "Eli Callahan, you saw me not as property to be owned, but as a person to be valued. You gave me the chance to use my knowledge, to be who I truly am. You stood against convention and criticism to treat me with dignity and respect. I promise to stand with you through whatever comes, to build a future where our children will know freedom and opportunity, and to love you with all the strength and wisdom I possess. I, by the power vested in me," Reverend Morrison declared, his own voice thick with emotion. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no one tear asunder." When Eli kissed his bride, the applause was mixed but genuine enough. As they turned to face their guests as husband and wife, Clara saw something that made her heart soar. Young Ben Morrison standing with a group of other young people, all applauding enthusiastically. The future, she thought, belongs to them. The reception that followed was unlike any Cedar Ridge had seen. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by neighbors. Some who'd initially opposed the match but had been won over by Clara's competence and kindness. Music filled the air as fiddles played and couples danced. Though some careful social navigation was required to avoid incidents, during a quiet moment, Clara found herself approached by a delegation of women led by Mrs. Patterson. "Mrs. Callahan," the minister's wife said formally, using Clara's new name with deliberate respect. "We've been discussing your proposal about education. Several of us would like to learn more about medical matters, not to become doctors, but to better care for our families. Would you consider teaching a class?" Clara's smile could have lit up the night. "I would be honored." As the evening progressed, she noticed other small miracles. Margaret dancing with Ben Morrison, the young man blushing furiously but determined. Dr. Holcomb deep in conversation with a group of ranchers about new veterinary techniques Clara had introduced. Jed Porter holding court with stories of Clara's courage during the siege, his pride evident. "No regrets?" Eli asked, appearing at her elbow during a break in the dancing. "None," Clara assured him. "You. Only that I didn't find you sooner." he replied, pulling her back onto the dance floor. As they swayed together, Clara became aware of a disturbance near the edge of the gathering. A group of hard-faced men had arrived, led by someone she recognized as one of Rourke's former associates who'd avoided prosecution. "Came to pay our respects," the leader said loudly, his tone making it clear respect was the last thing on his mind. "Heard Callahan went and married his wife?" Sheriff McKenna interrupted smoothly, appearing with several deputies. "And you gentlemen weren't invited to this celebration. I suggest you move along." "Free country," the man sneered. "We got a right to—" "You've got a right to leave peacefully," Eli said, stepping forward. At his movement, Jed and several other ranchers also stood, forming a protective wall. "Or not peacefully. Your choice." For a tense moment, violence threatened. Then Dr. Holcomb spoke up, his voice carrying the authority of years of respect in the community. "A gentleman, Miss Clara, Mrs. Callahan, saved half the cattle in this county with her knowledge. Any man who disrespects her disrespects every rancher she's helped. Is that really the position you want to take?" The troublemakers looked around, seeing not just Eli's supporters but neutral parties nodding agreement with the doctor's words. Muttering threats, they retreated, followed at a distance by the sheriff's men to ensure they left the area. "Thank you," Clara said quietly to those who'd stood up. "No need for thanks," one rancher replied gruffly. "You've earned your place here, ma'am. Anyone says different will hear from us." The rest of the evening passed peacefully. As the moon rose full and bright, Eli and Clara made their rounds, thanking guests and accepting good wishes, some more sincere than others, but all peaceful. Late that night, after the last guest had departed and the ranch had settled into quiet, Clara and Eli stood on their porch, looking out over the land they would tend together. "I've been thinking," Eli said, his arm around her waist, "about what you said, about our children knowing freedom and opportunity. I want to do more than just hope for that. I want to help make it happen." "What did you have in mind?" "That educational fund you mentioned to Doc Holcomb. I want to contribute to it. And more. I want to set aside part of our profits each year to help young people who show promise but lack means. Black, white, Mexican, doesn't matter. If they've got the drive to learn, they should have the chance." Clara turned in his arms, looking up at him with eyes bright with unshed tears. "Eli Callahan, I love you more than words can say. And I love you, Clara Callahan, my wife, my partner, my equal." As they sealed their commitment with a kiss, a wolf howled somewhere in the distant hills, not a threat, but a wild, free sound that seemed to echo their own triumph over convention and adversity. The months that followed brought both challenges and victories. Clara's veterinary practice flourished, with ranchers traveling from neighboring counties to seek her expertise. The educational fund grew, supporting its first students, including not just Ben Morrison but also Maria Gonzalez, daughter of a migrant worker, and Samuel Freeman, a young freedman who showed remarkable aptitude for mathematics. Margaret Doyle proved herself invaluable at the clinic, her organizational skills allowing Clara and Dr. Holcomb to focus on medicine while she handled the business side. More surprisingly, she began courting Thomas Ashford, a widowed schoolteacher who appreciated her intelligence more than her faded beauty. "He sees me," she confided to Clara one day. "Really sees me, not just what I represent or used to represent." "That's all any of us want," Clara replied gently. "To be seen for who we truly are." The Callahan Ranch itself prospered. With the compensation from Rourke's seized assets and Clara's additional income, they were able to expand their operations. They hired more workers, paying fair wages and treating all with dignity regardless of background. The ranch became known as a place where hard work was rewarded and character mattered more than color. On a cool autumn evening, as Clara was closing the clinic, she felt the first flutter of new life within her womb. She placed a hand over her still flat stomach, marveling at the miracle of it. A child who would be born free, raised in love, educated without limits. She found Eli in the barn, tending to a newborn calf. His face lit up when he saw her, as it always did. "How's our patient?" she asked, nodding to the calf. "Strong and healthy, thanks to what you taught me about proper birthing procedures." He studied her face, noting something different. "What is it?" "You're glowing." "I am," Clara smiled, taking his large hand and placing it on her stomach. "Perhaps because I'm carrying the future." Understanding dawned in Eli's eyes, followed by joy so pure it took her breath away. He dropped to his knees, pressing his face against her belly. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "Oh, no, I'm your papa, and you are already so loved." As winter approached, bringing with it the season's first snow, rare in their part of Texas, Clara stood in her clinic, now expanded with a proper surgical suite and recovery area. On the walls hung not only her certificates of partnership, but also letters from grateful ranchers, drawings from young students, and a photograph of Dr. Josiah Freeman in pride of place. "You did it, doctor," she whispered to the photograph. "You planted seeds of knowledge in ground everyone said was barren, and look what's grown." A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. A young black couple stood there, travel-worn and hesitant. "Are you the animal doctor?" the woman asked. "The one who used to be, who understands our situation?" "I'm Dr. Clara Callahan," Clara replied warmly. "And yes, I understand. How can I help you?" As she welcomed them in, learning about their sick horse and their dreams of starting their own small farm, Clara reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from the auction block to the clinic, from property to professional, from slave to equal partner in marriage and life. The road hadn't been easy. There were still those who refused to accept her, who whispered behind their hands when she walked through town with her head held high. There always would be, she suspected, but there were also those who'd learned to see beyond color to competence, who brought their animals to her with trust, who sent their children to learn from her. Change happened slowly, one person at a time, one kindness at a time, one act of courage at a time. As she worked on the couple's horse, explaining each step so they could learn, Clara felt the baby move within her, the future stirring, ready to be born into a world that, while far from perfect, was better than the one she'd known. Later that evening, she and Eli hosted their weekly dinner for the students in their educational program. The table that had once seated 3 now groaned under the weight of food for a dozen eager young minds. They discussed everything from animal anatomy to literature, from mathematics to dreams of the future. "I want to be a doctor like you, Mrs. Callahan," Maria Gonzalez announced, "a real doctor who helps people and animals both." "I want to build things," Ben Morrison added, "bridges and buildings that last forever." "I want to teach," Samuel Freeman said quietly. "To pass on what I learn like you do for us." Clara looked around the table at these young faces, black, white, brown, all united in their hunger for knowledge and their respect for those who shared it. This was Dr. Freeman's true legacy, she realized. Not just the knowledge he'd passed to her, but the understanding that knowledge shared multiplies rather than diminishes. "You can be anything you're willing to work for," she told them. "The world is changing, slowly, sometimes painfully, but changing nonetheless. And you, all of you, are part of that change." After the students left, Clara and Eli sat by the fire, her head on his shoulder, his hand resting protectively over their growing child. "No regrets?" he asked as he had on their wedding day. None, she replied as she had then. But this time she added only gratitude. For you, for this life, for the chance to use my gifts freely. Our children will never know what it means to be property, Eli said fiercely. They'll grow up seeing their mother respected for her knowledge, seeing people of all colors working together. They'll think that's normal. God willing, Clara agreed. And if we do our work right, one day it will be. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. But inside, warmed by fire and love and hope, Clara Callahan, once meant to be a slave, now a wife, doctor, teacher, and soon to be mother, looked toward a future bright with possibility. The journey from chattel to cherished, from property to partner, was complete. But the larger journey toward a world where all people were truly seen as equal had only just begun. And Clara, with Eli by her side and their community growing stronger each day, was ready to continue that journey for as long as it took, for she had learned that freedom was not just the absence of chains, but the presence of choices. And she chose love, chose knowledge, chose to build rather than tear down. In that choosing, she had found not just liberty but purpose. And in the end, that purpose, to heal, to teach, to lift others as she had been lifted, was the greatest freedom of all.